Welcome to Bill Tessar's Industry Insights, and thanks for tuning in today for today's episode, Tessar's State of the Market Address. The meat of today's episode, as you know, is to have a candid dialogue about what is actually going on right now. What is going on in the market right now? So much has changed, so much continues to change. So the Cliff Notes, we're going to be talking about concerns about lenders closing their doors. We are going to be talking about the uncertainty of a potential recession, the importance of diversifying your portfolio, finding or creating security in your real estate investment strategy, and navigating the inventory and rate fluctuations. So for those of you regulars out there who we like to call our industry insiders, you know that we traditionally have a guest or a panel joining Bill. But today, my friends, you get 100% Bill. You are in for a treat. We're going back to our roots. This is going to be a pretty candid dialogue with just Bill and myself to get his thoughts on what's going on. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Gina Como. I am Vice President of Communications here at CIVIC, and I'm proud to say it's my 5th year at CIVIC. You may or may not have seen my face on social promoting some content for CIVIC, some educational tidbits for the real estate investing financing world. But my team and I have been building content for CIVIC throughout this journey. And I will say one of our favorite parts of our jobs is getting to be real about what we do and working for a company that does the same. And I will tell you that starts with a leader, and getting to work for a leader who exhibits that authenticity is a treat, and that is nothing that we take for granted. So I'm really excited to have this dialogue with Bill today and bring it to you. And again, we welcome your questions and your feedback. As always, I will always say this, we know how valuable your time is. So we can assure you, no matter what role that you play in the real estate world right now, this is going to be time well spent. So without any further ado, taking the mic today is our very own President and CEO of CIVIC Financial Services, Bill Tessar. Bill has over 35 years in the mortgage industry. He is our true visionary lending leader, and he just continues through each conversation to elevate the private lending space. We just got word that yesterday CIVIC was actually named Lender of the Year at the Jurassic Captivate Conference. So congratulations, Bill. We are super proud of that. And Bill, since 2017, since he took over as CEO, has led CIVIC to achieve several milestones, received several awards, such as this Lender of the Year. We were 2021 AAPL Lender Member of the Year. And Bill is just an all-around leading voice in the lending industry. So kicking things off today is the man of the hour. Bill?
Thank you. Yeah, I just found out about the Jurassic thing. I was happy to know we had representatives out there. I don't think I even knew we were nominated for that. So that was kind of a neat thing. So listen, this is different in that every one of our other industry insights, alongside you, I get to learn things from the speakers that are joining me. And, you know, I've always done that grab a nugget and run approach to every single lesson or discussion or book or conference I've ever been to. And like, when you think about it, in just under 40 years, there's a whole bunch of nuggets. And I think most of the people that I talk to today, and if you think about it, for 4 decades, I've literally surrounded myself with people in the real estate industry, whether that be realtors or developers or investors or lenders, whether that be private money or non-QM or conventional, escrow, title, appraisal, credit, all of them. That's really been my life since I was 18 years old. And it's a compilation of all those conversations and observations and experiences that kind of lead us to where we are today. And I think most people, when you talk to them today, it's cloudy and murky, and they can't really quite figure out what tomorrow looks like. And I'm here to tell you that it's never been more clear for me. And so what I'm going to share with you today is the collection of information that falls between my two ears. And it is my view on the marketplace and nobody other than my view. But I got to tell you, I have never been more comfortable or confident in the position as I sit here today. And so there's lots of conflict in terms of what people believe is happening right now today, 2022. And there's a lot of comparison to the 2008 so-called housing bubble. So I thought, Gina, maybe I would just start it off by getting some clarity on what the differences between 2022 and 2008 is. And so listen, folks, having lived through the financial crisis of 2007 through 11, let me start by telling you it is absolutely nothing like what we're experiencing today. It is comparing a 72 Pinto to a 2022 Bentley. If anybody's driving a Pinto out there, no pun intended. Our family had a Pinto back in the day, but they're two totally different cars and two totally different stories. And so I would start by telling you that in 2008, it wasn't a housing bubble. It was a credit crisis. You should all know that the loans that were being done at that time were loans that probably should have never even been thought of at that time. And so let's just start with the market. The market was at a fever pitch high, and it was at a fever pitch high because there were consumers that were able to get into housing that under normal circumstances, they would have never been able to get into. So you say, well, what does that mean? I would start by saying LTVs. So you saw a lot of lenders go 95 to 100%, meaning 5% down or no money down. You had FICO levels as low as 580, and you had stated income and stated assets. So let's just think through this for a second. Bill Tessar goes to the lender. He's got no W-2s, no tax returns, no pay stubs, no bank statements, and no other forms of liquidity to verify. I have a 580 credit score, which is about as hard to do as getting a 780 credit score. You have to intentionally not pay stuff to get down to 580. And they were doing 95 and 100% loans to $1 million. And they didn't care how many properties you have. You know, The Big Short was a great show in that it covered a lot of what was going on there. Maybe not everything, but for the most part, the credit crisis was we lent to people that we shouldn't have lent to. And so what happened? The market shifted down 5 or 10%, and you had all these folks that limped into these properties with no skin in the game, now saw their properties go underwater saying, why would I be throwing my good money at bad money when my house is down 40, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. And so then what you saw is this whole wave of legal representation work its way into the market. And a lot of those folks out there were showing homeowners how they could stay in their home without paying mortgage payments and paying that $1,000 legal fee every month and saved a $3,000 or $4,000 mortgage payment. And they ran that game for 3 to 5 years. You had a lot of people during that time hadn't made a mortgage payment in 60 months. And they knew all the legal maneuvering. So you think about that, and then those inventory levels got to a fever pitch high because you had banks that were underwater. They had their stocks that weren't performing. They weren't showing all of those properties that were actually going through the foreclosure process because many were stymied through these legal actions. And then you look back at that time, and if you just think about listings alone, and we're going to get to inventory in a bit, but if you think about listings alone, the number of houses that were listed in 2007 and 2008 are 4 times the number that are listed today. So you had a plethora of housing. You had most of them underwater. They had to go through this process. And this literally took years. There were moments in time at my company that we were looking at the screens to see what bids were happening in Wall Street. And there were no bids at all. There were no mortgage bids because no one knew what was the right mortgage or the wrong. But people call it a housing bubble, but it had nothing to do with prices being too high. It had to do with people being in those houses that weren't credit qualified, that had no business being in those houses, and that spent more energy into staying in those rent or mortgage free for a long period of time than they did in actually putting together a credit package that would have qualified them. And so when you think about that, that is entirely different than what we're experiencing today. Today, right now, it's the greatest credit quality package in the history of lending. What does that mean? FICOs historically are higher now than they've ever been. They're in the low to mid 700s. Liquidity for an average homeowner is higher than it's ever been. Loan to value, meaning equity in your home, is higher than it's ever been. And then inventory levels are the lowest it's ever been. And so when you think about the two, there's just no area of discussion in comparison between the two. None. Zero. And so I think it's simple for some to say, hey, we had an unbelievable run in COVID. Think about this, y'all. Like, I know we're all in alignment on this. When COVID hit, most of the world thought real estate values were going to go into the toilet. And that really didn't happen. And most of the lenders thought, we got a problem. And that didn't happen. That was a 6 to 8 week hiccup. And so what really happened is the world changed about how we thought about real estate, and housing went the exact opposite way, which we'll talk about in a bit. But just, to put a kind of bow on the comparison, when you start looking at all these things, inventory levels 4 times higher, interest rates were 150 to 200 basis points higher then, 6 to 7% for a 30-year fix in 2007, 2008 compared to now. Even with the rise in the last 4 months, we're still at levels significantly lower than we were in 2007, 2008. Credit quality packages, entirely different. And I just don't think that you're going to see the reaction in the marketplace anywhere close to what you saw before. And then you've got a couple other things, Gina, that I think really play into this. 40 million households, 40 million took advantage of refinancing over the last 4 years. 40 million at historic low rates. Those loans are never going to be redone. They will only be paid off. No one's refinancing those loans into lower interest rates. I'm going to make the prediction, not in my lifetime. We're not going to see rates down in the 2s again. Not in my lifetime. And I plan on being here for a few years. So that's prediction number 1. So what does that really mean? It means most of those folks, unless it is death or divorce or dislocation of a job, are probably not going to sell those properties, which is going to put further challenges on the inventory levels. And so when you think about that, and I know most of you have heard me say this, and I did some additional research to just check my math, we're still 4.5 to 6 million homes underwater in terms of supply and demand right now. You have more people coming into the country. You got more of the younger generation becoming home buyers. You got more of the people that own homes staying in homes because of a variety of reasons that we'll talk about in a bit. I'm going to tell you right now, the housing shortage is going to be the giant wall blocker to inflation, to interest rates, to talks of recession, to talks of the real estate being overvalued. It is a simple supply and demand issue. And we have that on our side for those that are worried about where real estate values are going. And let me tell you something, like, I'm surrounded by very close friends and experts in the business, and we love the banter and go back and forth. I've never been more certain about the long-term prospects of real estate given the shortage of it. Like, just think about cars, think about all the stuff in stores that we had shortages, watches and all these other luxury items, shortages, higher prices, tough demand, can't get it, everyone wants it. It's the same sort of thing. And so finishing this up, we'll go to the next part, but we saw a bit of an exhale on the frenzy. The frenzy was crazy. The frenzy was great for those people that were selling, probably tougher for those people that were buying. In order to buy, you had to be a cash buyer, you had to be non-contingent, you had to close quickly, you had to be willing to pay above list price. And if you weren't willing to do those things, you probably weren't getting a property. I think the exhale right now is actually good. It's balanced for a healthy, more normal marketplace. And make no mistakes about it. Exhaling in a frenzy doesn't mean you're going downwards. Like all the reports I'm seeing are still showing 5 to 10% year over year appreciation, which isn't bad. It's not 22% in a quarter that we saw in some areas, but it's still incredibly well. So look at, please, like if you ever want to have an offline conversation about 2008 to 2022 and you didn't get what I was saying, I'm happy to do that, but no comparison. Like apples and oranges, different universes, totally.
Okay, so
How do I really feel?
I am super clear on how you really feel. So let's, like, to go into that further though, let's talk about rates, like a little bit more. And when it comes to rates and the impact that rates have had on all lending channels, not just conventional, there are other lending channels.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that.
Yeah. So for all of you that don't know, prior to Civic, I spent 30 years on the conventional side of the business, conventional owner occupied, Fannie, Freddie, some portfolio, Ginnie Mae, your VAs, FHAs, all sorts of those things. And so I basically spent most of my adult life on that side of the aisle. And what my experience has always been, and we'll get to what's going on right now, is, you know, you build a solid foundation of a company based on a expected rate run, and something happens in the marketplace where rates go down. And in this case, it really happened around 2017, 2018. And rates dipped down and then legged down again, and then legged down a third time, and then COVID hit and it legged down a fourth time. And so what took place on the conventional side is 5 years of historic refinances, like unprecedented, unbelievable. I have a lot of friends on this call right now that make a living on the conventional side of the business, and it was the greatest economic run of their lives. Like unbelievable amount of volume done across the nation. And what happens in a correction, and hey, I'm proud to say that I did call this rate correction. I was only about 2 years off. We used to call it the winter of death. We said the winter of death is coming because these companies get so big, and then one slight switch of interest rates where the refinances leg down, then there's a cause and effect to that, which we'll talk about. But I was off on the years that COVID had a little something to do with that, and it hit. And so rates start going up. And ultimately what happens across the nation is refinances have dropped 75 to 90%. 75 to 90%. Any one of you that have access to the internet know that the amount of, we call them RIFs, reduction in forces, that are taking place across the nation with the bigger lenders is significant. It always starts the same way. You get rid of maybe the last ones in, maybe more peripheral players in your company, and then you start cutting deep. And some of the folks that I'm close with are telling me that the cuts they're having on the conventional side go to the A players now. And, you know, my experience, none of these CEOs are calling me, asking me for it, but if you're listening, you can have it for free, is you can't cut your way to profitability. You need to put a flag in the ground, and you need to say, this is who we are, and have some runway, and come up with a different marketing plan to establish yourself in this new financial world order of rates being 250 basis points higher. And I think some lenders are trying to do that right now, and I think others are going to fail miserably. So what you'll see on the bigger firms is you're going to either see them acquire other companies, probably mid-sized companies, and try to get to some scale while they cut back. And then I think on the smaller companies, the more nimble companies, they're going to be fine because they didn't have heavy overhead. I think the middle gets wiped out. I mean, not 100%, but I think the middle has to choose whether they're going to get smaller and control expenses, or get swallowed up by a bigger company and have some economies of scale. That we're there now. Like the reductions in forces from the big companies, everyone has read. Thousands and thousands of people have been cut, good quality mortgage people. And you see some of the late originators that have come into the game going into other fields. Now the pros, the ones that have been around a lot, the ones that have built a purchase business and actually have some tenure, they're going to be great. Like some of the counseling I've given to some of those folks is this could be some of the best times of your life, but you're going to see a massive shift on the conventional side. The margins are just too thin and the expense factor is too high, and something has to change there. And you're seeing that now. As you go to non-QM, well, let me back up for a second. One last thing to put a bow on the conventional side is I think you're going to see products come out. The next answer after cuts is products. And so they've made a fortune on 30-year fix. Why wouldn't they? It was at 5. Then they went to Bill Tessar and they said, I can make your 5 look like a 4.5. Then they made it look like a 3.75. And then they did it to 3.25. And they tucked me in at 2.75 on a 30-year fix. And so off I was done. I think what you're going to see now is you'll see the graduated payment mortgages, the 2-1 buy downs, you qualify at your start rates, more interest only loans, stuff to get people excited about buying real estate again and getting back in the game. What they're not going to be able to do immediately, this was an old trick, just so you all know, like an old trick was when rates gapped down, they were at 6%. And then through the next couple of years, they leaked back up to 7. You'd go in and you'd offer cash out refis to consumers who had built up some credit card debt and are paying 18 to 20% on the credit card debt. And you wrap all that into the mortgage, which is tax deductible, and it's at 7%. It's higher than the 6 that they had, but lower than the 19. I don't think you're going to be able to do this time around. The rates are just too low. So it's going to have to be products that excite people about getting back into the game. And I think that's the next wave that we're going to see, probably fourth quarter and first quarter of 2023. You're going to see some exciting things from some of the bigger firms. And I think the market will benefit from that. As it relates to non-QM and business purpose loans, it's a much smaller space. And it's much more susceptible to radical change. And so what we've seen in this last rate hike, what generally happens in our space is this, folks. A lender will originate loans. They'll go out to their customers and they'll get loans in and they'll underwrite those and they'll fund those and they'll put those loans on their warehouse line. And they aggregate those to some certain critical mass. And then they sell that critical mass to a Wall Street outlet of sorts. And so while they're originating it, most of them, 95% of them, because rates really weren't fluctuating, are not hedging that product, meaning covering themselves if rates go up. So what happened is rates went up so fast and most of those lenders got stuck with loans in their warehouse line that they originated thinking they were going to make a 1 to 3 point premium and then went to the marketplace and realized they were 5 to 10 points underwater. So if you just do fast math, if a lender originated $100 million of loans and they thought they were getting a 2 point premium, they thought they had $2 million of revenue in that pool that was going to drop into their company and help pay bills. And then they go to sell it and they realize they have to bring in 5 to 8 million to get rid of the loans. Like you could imagine what that does for certain lenders that don't have the liquidity or balance sheet or net worth to trade. And we watched that happen to a whole bunch of folks, still happening right now, like dislocated a bunch of folks. Now, there have been some lenders that have hedged. Some lenders raised their rates quickly and they're doing workouts with the others. Some lenders went away. We benefited from being a balance sheet lender. We were acquired in 2021, February of 2021 by a publicly traded bank. And so we have balance sheeted all of our loans and didn't have to rely on that sales outlet at that time. And so I think there was some built-in benefit to that, but I could just tell you across the board, it has been like the 71 earthquake in California. Like it has shaken up the industry in a massive way. And I'm not even sure that some of the folks that still have their names posted on websites are going to be around in a short period of time. Like there's a lot to solve. I just think by way of perspective, if you think about where rates are on the conventional side, and I think I'd be remiss not to mention this, is we were looking at just 5 years ago. If you just go back 5 years ago, you're looking at rates. Well, if you look, I'll give you a better stat. If you go back to 1970, so call it 30, 40 years. What is that? 40? No, 40 years, 50 years. The average rate of a 30-year fix was 7.75. So like people are freaking out at high fours, low fives, or mid fives. Like rates are still ridiculously low. They're just not low relative to where they were at the beginning of the year. And I think that's the perspective that more folks need to have. It's very simple to get lost in, I didn't get the bottom. And believe it or not, there were a lot of folks that missed this refi boom, even though it lasted 4 to 5 years. There were still a lot of folks that missed it. 40 million didn't. 40 million did take advantage of it, but still an awful lot of folks that missed it. I still think rates are good relative to the perspective of time. And when you think about it as it relates to mortgage, it's one of the last great tax write-offs. So when you calculate your payment, and maybe we get a chance to talk about this when you compare it to rents, when you calculate your payment based on your current tax rate, if you're in a 40% tax bracket all in, you're taking 40% of that interest, like cash benefit to you. So when you start comparing that to rents, the interest rates where they are on a conventional side are still very, very favorable. I think it's just a sticker shock, Gina. It's a sticker shock of, I didn't hit the bottom. My friend got 2.75. I don't, I'm waiting for the rates to come down. I wouldn't recommend anybody if you're looking to transact, waiting for the rates to come down. I think right now is as good a time as any to take advantage of it. It's a lot about rates.
So that's all very important about rates. And to kind of play on that, because there are so many different layers, I want to talk to you about supply chains. So you had mentioned inventory levels when addressing the housing crisis, and we all know that there are supply chain issues throughout right now. But can you talk about how those two factors are creating challenges for investors right now?
Yeah. So look, if you take a look back 12, 18 months, I don't think there's any question that supply chains, quality contractors have been in short supply. Like they've created longer lag times, and it's taken a bit more for investors to get in and out of projects, especially those that are flipping, right? Not keeping. My view is things are getting better. I know that from personal experience. It is easier today to get a quality contractor to do quality work in a timely manner than it was 6 months ago. And so I think we're out of the peak of darkness, which existed in the middle of the pandemic. And I think we're starting to see turn times and projects get better. We're just like, we're going to do 8,000 business purpose loans this year. We track and moderate what our investors thought they were going to do with the project and what they actually did. And I'm seeing improvements across the board with that. So look, it was bad. We all saw the ships outside of the Long Beach Harbor with all of the supplies that we were just desperately waiting to get ashore so we could finish our project. And I watched a lot of big investors pivot with the quality of the way they thought they were going to build their home to get access to stuff that was a little bit more readily available. But I do really believe we're out of the dark part of those supply chain issues. Think about it from an ROI issue. In 2021, the average gross profit made by a home flipper was $67,000. $67,000, and they're calling for year to date somewhere around 60 grand. So you'd say, oh, they've lost 10%. I'd say, yeah, I think most of that is probably the easing of the frenzy, right? Because they were selling into the frenzy, so they were getting top dollar for their project, their project, and the rates were low, so carrying costs were low, and that all factors into ROI. So you got higher rates, you don't have the frenzy, so you actually have to be a gentleman or a gentlewoman when you're selling your home and not just put a sign up and say, pay me 110% of list. So I think you're seeing a little bit more of that, but just like, think about it, $60,000 for an average ROI, that's not bad. And I could tell you, I know there are people on this call right now that have traded inside of flips and made 400,000 to 700,000 on properties under 2 million. So like you're talking about real ROI. And when you think about the leverage of finance, you could be talking about 100% cash on cash returns. So you don't hear a lot of that, but what I can tell you is I see them. Like I get this, I have optics into what all those investors are doing. And even at 60,000, if that's the new number, based on the frenzy pause and based on the higher rates, I still think it presents a tremendous amount of opportunity for our investors.
So the opportunities that are happening, I would say, in several more markets now than before COVID, right? The definition of a hot area has changed entirely. So are you seeing any changes in real estate opportunities in areas as it relates to a larger percentage of people working from home? I know you like to call it home sweet home. So what are you seeing in that regard?
So let me spit some stats at you, and then I'll give you my truth. Just under 5 million people in the workforce work at least 50% of the time at home. 5 million. That's a bigger number than it's ever been in any measured period of time from a work from home workforce. Now, I know there are some companies out there that want to get everyone back, and they want to get them back sitting shoulder to shoulder. I'll say this, and then I'll get to your question. At CIVIC, there was anybody on this call could have met that was a bigger believer in having everyone under one roof, working shoulder to shoulder, wearing the same jersey, marching to the same, hymn book and conquering the world. That was me. Like I grew up coaching baseball and football. I got a coach's mentality. I want my players around me and I want to go. And so COVID hit, and there was a big oh shit moment for me. Like, how in the hell are we going to do what we need to do with people at home, with their dogs and their kids and Netflix and Ted Lasso and all that stuff and food and in their kitchen and sunshine and all the yoga? Like, how we're never going to be able to do it. And the fact of the matter is, Gina, that people did it and did it better than they've ever done it before. And they managed and governed themselves because they were so grateful to be able to spend that extra time with their children, with their older loved ones, with their pets, private time, health, not commuting. All that stuff changed for us. And we saw an output like unlike anything we'd ever seen in 4 decades I've been in the business. I literally sat in this chair right here and shook my head and I said, I just can't believe it. And month after month after month, when the states required people to be home, our team performed. And it changed my entire perspective on home sweet home. And it changed my entire perspective on CIVIC Anywhere. And so for us, and what I would hope for all the companies in the United States that can do it, like obviously if you're working the hamburger line in McDonald's, you can't do that from home. Like some people need to come in. But for those that don't have to, I think it is going to change real estate in the next 10 to 20 years in a way that few people are thinking about it. So just think about this. Like, in our own company, I think we've had 25% of our executives have left the Redondo Beach corporate office. They've left. They would never have been able to leave under normal circumstances, and they left. They've gone to Texas, they've gone to Arizona, they've gone to Vegas, they've gone to South Carolina, they've gone to Nashville, they've gone to Miami, and God bless them. God bless them. They're living their best life, and they're getting all the stuff they're supposed to get done here at CIVIC. And that applies to others. So when you start thinking about real estate, I guess the first thing I think about is, like, I think about state taxes first, because for some folks, that makes a big difference. If it's California and you're just round up to 14% and you compare it to a state that has 0, you're keeping 14,000 for every 100,000 you make to your family. 14,000 for every 100,000. That's like significant amount of money. And then you think about how the dollar stretches. If I was going to compare California to Vegas or Arizona or Nashville or Charlotte or any of those, your dollar stretches further. So now for the first time, Gina, you can say, my family lives in Charlotte. I've always wanted to be there, but I never could be because my job is here in Redondo. I'm raising my son. My husband and I have always wanted to be in Charlotte. We get twice the house for half the cost. And I save money on state taxes. So now people are moving. And so it's creating desirability in these areas that may not have been as desirable because they weren't hubs for workforces. So all of us need to keep that in the back of our head in anything you think about as you invest in real estate. That's number one. Now, if Home Sweet Home really does have 4.7 million people working from home, I think the number gets bigger, not smaller. 3.8 million people are homeschooled nationally in the US. So now Home Sweet Home is now a school. Home Sweet Home is now an arm of your work. It's a place that you're raising your family. Like, I think that inventory things that we're talking about could be multiplied because people just are not getting in and out of their residence the way they were before. They're building their house different. They're furnishing their house different. They're thinking about their house different. And it's multifaceted, and it's not just a place to find a good school and raise my kids. And so you ask about some of the higher returns. I get all the reports, all the CoreLogics and Black Knights and Fred and Adam and all that stuff. And I'll just tell you, like, high level, San Diego, parts of LA, Vegas, Phoenix, Denver, Houston, Boston, believe it or not, Miami, a couple areas that came through on a recent report that really kind of surprised me as high likelihoods of negative returns over the next 12 months was there was 4 cities in Washington, like Olympia, Tacoma, Bremerton, and one other, and Boise City, Idaho. And I can't offer anybody any reason for why. It was a recent report that I read. I haven't actually seen it, like, from our investors enough to share, but that's just like high level, hot areas, things to think about. For me, if your dollar stretches further, you have some state tax benefit, you can work from home. I think that you got to contemplate that in terms of where you're going to put your money, whether you're going to do a flip or you're building long-term rentals. I would be remiss to not share that, because I think it's a super important fact that people overlook.
So just in the interest of time, Bill, I collectively have a consensus of so many questions that are coming in, and everyone knows that you talk to the biggest investors in our space, right? So,
Yep.
I unfortunately, I don't know that we're going to get to everybody's questions, but I'm going to do my best here to channel
Yeah.
over to you what would be a really great takeaway for everybody. And that is, people want to know, what are these top investors doing right now? What is their play? What are you seeing?
So, without sharing any trade secrets, you all should know that before PWB acquired us, Wedgwood was our parent company. Wedgwood, I think, is, if it's not the largest, one of the largest purchasers, fix and flippers in the nation. I think they purchase, fix and flip about 600 properties a month. And their CEO and I talk every 2 weeks. We have a standing one-on-one that goes for about an hour, and it's really all market related. And one of the things I've always loved about Greg and their team is he doesn't try to be perfect with all of his trades. He saw rates go up. He saw the frenzy kind of exhale. They gapped their prices down from the absolute high, fever pitch high, and blew out that inventory and got the powder dry for the next round of purchases. So what I'm seeing from the biggest investors is they're getting their powder dry. They're getting their financing lined up, and they're getting ready to get in. I think, are they in now? Yeah. I mean, Wedgwood and some of the other folks are buying right now. We have record originations today. So people are buying. I think they're going in and they're asking for more than they were asking for 3 or 4 months ago. And in most cases, they're getting it. I think the sellers realize that frenzy might be over, and they're hitting that bid as well. And so, blowing out old inventories, coming into the market with new fresh eyes, new set numbers, understanding financing is a little bit different. I just think re-entering at corrected levels is probably the most important factor. But I would tell you, the overall sentiment of the majority of the investors we deal with are very, very bullish on real estate. Very bullish. It's just getting into the right areas, the right zoning, the right friendly ordinances, great schooling, Maybe they're a little bit more picky, only to maximize their ROI. Velocity of getting in and out would be better because of the things we talked about before, Gina. So yeah, I do think that it's about making sure you have your capital lined up. And listen, folks, if you don't have it yourself, align yourself with other partners. It's okay to go into a deal with 2 or 3 partners. Everyone brings something to the table. Somebody might bring credit, somebody might bring cash, somebody might bring sourcing, somebody might be the general contractor. I mean, it's a good model. You don't have to do everything on your own. And I think that's probably one of the biggest inhibitors of those getting into the game, is they want to do it all themselves. And there's a lot of smart folks that you could align yourself with, and a lot of contractors that would establish partnerships if given the opportunity, and a lot of cash on the sideline to get involved in the deal if you're the one sourcing it. So I think that's okay to do.
So we can go a couple different directions here, but I'm going to kind of stick to the question we just spoke of. And compared to the top investors that you're talking to, and to kind of cut through to you individually, you personally, what are you doing? I mean, without going into personal details, can you share some insight into your personal strategy right now?
Yeah. So in fairness, it's changed a little bit, but only because I know me very well. And if you asked me this question 90 to 120 days ago, I was hot and heavy on the short-term rental thought, and started sourcing properties out like in the La Quinta, PGA West area, and was really thinking about short-term rentals from that perspective. Here's what I know about me. If I end up getting a nice house that my family enjoys and I have pictures in that house, I'm not very good at wanting to rent that one out. So I thought that was a crappy strategy, because I would go into it with certain ideas and economics, and I'd come out of it entirely different. So like, look, Gina, I have a property I've owned for 22 years. I raised my kids in that property, and then have leased it out up in the mountains in Wood Ranch for the last 5 years. My tenant is out. My wife is running as GC of that project, and she is bringing that property up to beautiful conditions. We're going to sell that, and I'm probably going to 1031 that into the South Bay area here, and pick up a property that we could put some work into, and that we would have as part of our rental portfolio. That's kind of where my head is right now, getting out of my own way a little bit. But and listen, if you asked me this maybe even 60 days ago, I might have just said, I'm going to sell it and pay the tax and wait to see what's happening with the market. I've seen what I need to see in the market, so I'll stay in it from that perspective for sure. Good question.
So
it's going to get back to my wife. You called me the general contractor? Yeah. Just without the pain.
there's a lot of power in that position.
There is. There is.
So we're almost to the top of the hour, and I know we want to have some time for questions, but what we always like to do in, tradition here on our show is leaving with your tips, your takeaways. And I know you've touched on so many different nuggets here, but when it comes to investors in today's market, what would be your tips for everybody on this call?
Yeah, my number one tip most people won't resonate to, and may even have a problem with, but it is by far the biggest. And I think you need to surround yourself with a team of professionals that you properly pay. Don't get the best realtor and then grind that realtor down in commission. Let the realtor earn their full pop, and they'll do a full pop of work for you. Your financing partner, ask for fair terms, not the gutted down, skinned back version of it. You want that finance person working hard for you. Your contractors, like what we always do is we have them come in their bid, we understand our bid, and then we send certain thresholds of time and performance that we will bonus those contractors so that they are, when they're managing 2 or 3 jobs, they're at my job first. We're not wondering where they are on Tuesday. Same with escrow and title. Now, some of you folks would say, yeah, I'm not sure that that trickles down to ROI properly. And, I get my realtor to do it for 2% and you pay an extra percent. And my lender, I get them down to a 0.5 point and you pay a full point. And they got all this math, but at the end of the day, you don't know if you got your highest and best everything in terms of time, delivery, and quality, and price, and all that stuff. I think you got to pay for it. It's okay. And for me, I surround myself with people I trust and I take care of them accordingly. So having a team of professionals around that you could pick up the phone and have access to valuable information in a moment's time, I would never, ever, ever grind any of those people down. Never do it. No, none of them. Second thing, I think cash is king. You need to have liquidity. If you're in this game, or you want to get in this game, save a lot. You have to have the reserves. You can't go into this thing, hat in hand with 2 or 3 months reserves. You really should be thinking about worst case scenario and have a solution for that. Some people, some of our bigger investors have gone out and established large lines of credit, not when they need it, when they don't need it, when they're the most credit qualified and when it's easy to get. So normally when you're looking for those sorts of things and your credit cards are tipping on the other end of max and you don't have as much reserves and you're highly leveraged, it's very difficult to accomplish. So do that when that's not the case. And I think resetting expectations, like there were a lot of home runs hit, grand slams, out of the park shots. I think singles and doubles need to be kind of more of the mindset when you go into a transaction. And if you do that and hit a ball off the wall and it turns into a triple, then great. But if you're hitting your singles and doubles, you're in the game, you're getting market reference, you're building relationships with your team, everyone, you're doing something for the economy. I just think that there's something to be said about that. And then I just think you got to invest in areas in high demand. Like do the research. Where are people employed? Where are the schools? What's going on with state taxes and other forms of benefits? Like just spend a little bit of time on the computer and do your work so that you come in with eyes, wide open. It's a good question. These are the things that I literally live my life by. And for any of the folks on the call that are my partners, they know that. Like, yeah, he would call me for XYZ and only me, and he won't grind me. Like I think those things are really important, Gina, and I think they're lost on quite a few people. Like I'm going to really take it to this professional and I'm going to save myself $3,000. Don't do it. Like, don't do it.
We were talking about Ted Lasso before we got started, and I am just going to draw this parallel that, it matters how you treat people. It matters, how you build your relationships. And I think that goes a long way with the partnerships that you're describing.
I think, Gina, if you give people more than they deserve, you get back way more than you deserve. And I've applied that in our business for many, many, many years. And those folks that have worked alongside me know that to be true. But like, invest in those relationships. Like, you just can't imagine what a fruitful life that is when you're doing it with people you love and care about and you trust. And in this business, you need to be able to trust people. You need people to shoot straight and give you accurate information in a timely manner. And you should pay for that. We all should pay for that.
Well said. I am going to jump into some questions. We have 8 minutes left. So we talked a lot about investors, right? But we have a lot of broker partnerships. And we got one question from Sean, and he says, as a broker, what would be the best product to focus on right now in this market?
So if they're just a standard broker that offers all the products, obviously 30-year fixed refinances is a no-no. I think it's probably difficult to get started in the purchase business if you haven't done that. And if you're doing it, you're going to have a unique selling proposition that's different from Like there's folks on this field that have spent 20 years establishing purchase relationships and they didn't participate in the refi boom. So those are pretty locked and loaded. Listen, I think our product is really, really interesting. Like it's really, really interesting because if you think about the conventional side, it's all like no points, save me $37 a month, rewrite the loan, get me into my home sweet home. This stuff is like people are getting in and out of transactions and that leverage makes a difference. So I think it's a good product to offer. On the conventional side, I think, look at if you offer reverse, you got to be an expert at that. That's probably good as you got more people becoming more baby boomers becoming retired each and every day. So I think that's probably a pretty good product. I would look for IO, interest only products. The jumbo market is super underserved. There's not a lot of products out there. I would look at that. But your standard 30-year fix, that's going to be a ghost product for a bit, I believe. Good question.
Okay, and this question comes from Brian. He references that last week there was an article in Bloomberg about non-bank lenders filing for bankruptcy. And part of the case was there were companies that were poorly capitalized. And so this question is asking to elaborate a little bit more on the CIVIC capitalization strategy. You mentioned PWB, you mentioned being acquired last February. What are your thoughts on that?
So there's like 3 or 4 questions in there. So I'll start with, there's a little pun that I've said, time and time again, that is, it goes something like, if you're in the business of lending money, don't run out of it. And we saw a whole bunch of lenders go out of the business when COVID first hit. And we saw a whole bunch of lenders kind of go out of the business as rates jumped up. It's interesting, Gina, because for many, many years early on in my career, I would have thought if a lender had a $25 million balance sheet or a $50 million balance sheet, and they had $3 to $5 million of liquid reserves, that they could actually be a force. And now, like there are lenders that have $100 million of equity in their business, and they are on the teeter. So I do think that having access to sticky capital, like a real cash outlet, whether that's a balance sheet or some forward commitments that are longer than a month, is necessary. Now, brokers get to come in and out of the market and grab those that are front and center. I think bankers is a different story. On the conventional side, very, very, very razor thin margins. So they got to be super good at what they do. And they got it. It's all transactional based, and they got to cover their positions with hedges. On our space, you don't see a lot of that. And so how do I think about it? I think that I didn't see that Bloomberg article, which is surprising because I read hundreds of them a week. But I think whoever asked that question, you're going to see more to come. I think you see some very, very big companies decide to get out. I think you see some mid-sized companies either get acquired or get super small or get out. And I think there's going to be a whole new lending landscape come the beginning of the year. I think some folks right now are finding they can't cut their way to profitability. You just can't. Like I said it earlier, you got to make a stand and say, okay, we have a burn of X and we're going to get through this, and here's our plan and we're going to go for it, and you go for it. Or you merge and align with another company that has some things you don't have and you offer something that they don't have, and you come together and the best folks stay, and hopefully that's enough to get to some form of break even. I think there's going to be more pain to come, though, for sure.
Okay, this next question comes from George, and he's referencing that large firms such as BlackRock, Zillow, others are buying homes, putting them into rental portfolios where they essentially may never hit the market again. So he wants to know your feeling on what long-term impact on investment properties do you think that has?
Goes back to some of the inventory constraints that we're talking about. Like if you think about now, you start piling all these things up, working from home, homeschooling, people no longer having to worry about commutes, moving out of state, people bringing their elderly parents in to live with them instead of nursing homes, large portfolios getting eaten up, 40 million people that took advantage of interest rates that are never, ever going to sell those properties unless it's death or divorce or dislocation. So all this stuff, same question George has, I think it all adds to inventory, supply and demand issues. And like, if you're a long-term investor of real estate, I think it's unbelievable for values. If you're somebody trying to get in to real estate, you need to get in sooner than later because real estate is going up for all the reasons and all the questions we're talking about. Like, you just can't. I thought Eddie Wilson was great. You remember we had him like 5-6 months ago? He was awesome. I love that guy. And
Absolutely.
he said he thought it would take 8 to 10 years of aggressive building, which we're not even seeing right now because a lot of builders pulled back with interest rates, aggressive building to get to some equilibrium. So just think about that. Like, I think that runway is long and wide. It's a good question.
Well, in answering that, you actually answered one of the other questions, because that's a lot of the questions are, what are your thoughts on how long this is going to take to level out? So
Well, some people
glad you
would argue
touched on
that
that.
it's leveling out kind of right now from the frenzy, but I mean, it just doesn't matter what it is. When you couldn't get toilet paper in the grocery store, people were online willing to pay 3 and 4 times whatever they were paying, and they were trying to buy it in bulk of 300 rolls. And it was coming from outside of the country because like people were crazy; they couldn't get it. Like, that's probably a radical exaggeration of real estate, but just think about it in terms of getting a car. Go to an auto dealership. There's no cars for sale. They just show you the cars that you have to order that will come in 3 to 5 months. Same sort of thing. Like, I just think there's too many competing factors from a supply and demand issue that's going to keep real estate values up. That inflation, interest rate, negative rhetoric in the marketplace, all that stuff, I just don't think it's enough. You need more supply. And until that happens, I think it's going to be a huge barrier to those that believe we're heading into a housing bubble.
So I'm going to squeeze in one more, and this one comes from Shayna. And again, there are a lot of questions kind of trending in the same direction, which is heading into the fourth quarter. Do you think that fix and flips are safe to take on?
Like, to be in the game?
Yep.
100%. I mean, we talked a little bit about that. The ROIs went from 67,000 down to 60, but supply chain issues have gotten better. Access to good quality contracts have gotten better. Maybe you have to level set your expectations, which is why I said look for singles and doubles and not home runs, right? Because rates are a little bit higher, so carrying costs are a little bit more. But I think the frenzy's down, so you're not overpaying going in. So yeah, 100%. And the applications are greater than that. So people are coming to us interested in this space from all over the United States. Yes, bullish. Yes, tell that person, move up, let's go. Buy themselves a fix and flip.
All right. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap it. And we have so many questions that are really going to make for some good follow-ups. I'll share them with you after, and just really appreciate everybody's engagement and helping this dialogue serve its purpose, which is just to tackle what is going on, get Bill's thoughts. So Bill, super appreciate your time. Do you have any closing thoughts you want to add?
No, I just, like you, Gina, grateful to have the opportunity to share. I think that that's how we all get better. If you didn't agree with 90% of the stuff that I said today, but one thing resonated with you and that made a difference in you or your role in acquiring real estate or selling real estate, then I think that it was worth the hour. I hope it's more than one, and I'll remain open. Gina, maybe you can share my contact information if anyone wants to reach out and ask me further questions about some of the stuff we talked about. But thank you for tuning in. Appreciate you.